Every yes you've ever gotten was decided before you said a single word. Not during the conversation, not because of your argument, not because you were persuasive, before. And if that feels uncomfortable, good, because it means something you've always believed about people, about decisions, about control, isn't true. You think you convince people. You think you present information. They evaluate it, and then decide. That's the story. That's not what's happening. Here's what's actually happening. The decision is made, and then your words arrive late to justify it. Read that again. The decision happens first. The explanation comes after. And the person saying yes? They believe the explanation. They believe it was their idea. You've seen this before, haven't you? Think about the last time you made a decision you felt confident about. A purchase, a choice, a person you trusted immediately. You didn't sit there analyzing for hours. It felt obvious, natural, right? And then, after, it made sense. You explained it to yourself. But that explanation, it came after the feeling. That's not a flaw. That's how the system works. There are two types of people hearing this right now. The first type is resisting it. They're thinking, no, I think things through. I'm rational. The second type is starting to remember moments where they didn't. Be honest. You've had moments where something just felt right, and you moved forward without fully knowing why. That wasn't intuition. That was influence. And here's where this gets uncomfortable. If your decisions are happening before you're aware of them, then you're not just influencing others. You're being influenced constantly, without noticing. That conversation you thought you controlled, you walked into it already leaning toward an outcome. You just didn't realize when the shift happened. Here's the part nobody teaches you. Influence doesn't happen when you speak. It happens when the other person is becoming ready to agree. Silently, internally, before you ever open your mouth. That's not what most people focus on. Most people obsess over what to say. The perfect words, the perfect pitch, the perfect timing of the ask. They rehearse, they optimize, they perform, but they're performing in the wrong place. Because by the time the conversation starts, the real decision is already leaning. That's not what's happening. Here's what's actually happening. Long before the conversation, something is shaping the other person's state, their mood, their attention, their expectations, their openness. And that state is what decides everything. Think about this. Have you ever agreed with someone faster than usual and later wondered why? Or rejected something immediately without giving it a real chance? That wasn't logic. That was state. Your brain doesn't operate like a judge. It doesn't sit in a courtroom weighing evidence. It operates more like a filter. It scans for patterns, signals, familiarity, and then it makes a decision fast. Long before you consciously catch up. Neuroscience has been showing this for years. Your brain can predict your decision before you're aware of making it. Not milliseconds, seconds, sometimes longer. So what does your conscious mind do? It builds a story, a clean, logical explanation for something that already happened, and you believe it every time. That's not what's happening. Here's what's actually happening. You are not deciding. You are arriving at decisions that were already formed. And if that's true for you, it's true for everyone else. Now stop for a second. Think about the last time someone said no to you. A real moment, a sale, a request, a conversation that didn't go your way. What did you analyze? Your words? Your tone? Your timing? That's what most people do. They replay the conversation. They tweak the script. They assume the failure happened in the moment. But that's not where it happened. It happened before. What was their mental state before you spoke? Were they distracted? Stressed? Already leaning against you without knowing it? What emotional signals were in the environment? What expectations were already forming? You didn't lose in the conversation. You walked into a decision that was already against you, and you tried to fight it with words. That never works. Here's where everything shifts. There's a concept that almost nobody truly understands. Even people who've heard of it underestimate it. Pre-suasion, not persuasion. Pre-suasion. Influence before the moment of influence. It's the art of shaping the mental environment before the decision happens. Because once the decision is forming, it's already too late to control it. Think of it like planting. You don't throw seeds on concrete and expect growth. You prepare the ground. You shape the conditions. You make the outcome feel natural. Most people don't do that. They walk into concrete and start throwing words, and then they wonder why nothing sticks. You've seen this happen. You've done this. Now let's make this real. Imagine two identical conversations. Same words, same tone, same person speaking. In one scenario, the other person is relaxed, focused, open. In the other, they're distracted, mentally overloaded, already irritated from something else. Same conversation, completely different outcome. Why? Because the decision wasn't about the words. It was about the state. That's what you've been missing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll start noticing it everywhere. In sales, in relationships, in everyday interactions. You'll see moments where people say yes before anything meaningful was said, and moments where they say no before they even understand what's being asked. And you'll realize something unsettling. The conversation was never the battlefield. The battlefield was everything before it. That's where influence lives. That's where decisions begin. That's where control actually exists. And once you understand that, you stop trying to win conversations. You start designing them. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Because if decisions are being made before you're aware of them, then the question isn't just how to influence others. The real question is, were your decisions ever truly yours to begin with? Because in the next section, you're going to see something that completely breaks that illusion. Not theory, not opinion. Actual experiments that show your brain moves before you do. And once you see it, you can't go back to believing you're fully in control. Section 2. The illusion of free will. You're not as free as you think. Every decision you think you made felt like yours. Most of them weren't. That's not a comfortable sentence. It's not supposed to be. And if your first instinct right now is to push back, to say no, I make my own choices, I think for myself, I want you to notice that reaction. Hold on to it. Because by the end of this section, you're going to understand exactly why that reaction exists, where it comes from, and why it proves the point more than it refutes it. The feeling of free will is real. Nobody is disputing that. The experience of choosing, of weighing, deciding, acting, is as vivid and immediate as anything in human consciousness. But the experience of something and the mechanics of something are two very different things. And the mechanics of human decision-making are far less free than the experience suggests. Let's go somewhere unexpected to start. A psychology laboratory in the 1980s. A researcher named Benjamin Libet wired people up to electroencephalography equipment, devices that measure electrical activity in the brain. He asked them to do something simple, flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. Freely, spontaneously, no prompting, just whenever the urge arose. He asked them to track two things simultaneously: the moment they felt the conscious urge to move, and the moment the movement actually happened. What he found disturbed the scientific community for decades. The brain showed preparatory electrical activity, what's now called the readiness potential, consistently before the person reported feeling the urge to move. Not after, before. The body was already initiating the movement before the conscious mind knew it wanted to move. The conscious experience of deciding, that vivid, immediate, undeniable sense of I am choosing this right now, was arriving late to a process that had already begun without it. This wasn't a small gap. This was a measurement error. This was a consistent, replicable finding that pointed to something profound and destabilizing. Consciousness, in many cases, is not the author of decisions. It's the narrator. Now let's bring this out of the laboratory and into your actual life. Because this isn't an abstract philosophical puzzle. This is the operating system running beneath every conversation you've ever had, every choice you've ever made, every yes or no you've ever given. Think about how you make decisions in the real world. Not the ones you deliberate over for weeks, the ordinary ones. What to order, whether to trust someone, how you feel about an idea in the first 30 seconds of hearing it, whether a price seems fair, whether a person seems credible. These decisions feel considered. They feel like you. But they're being generated by a system that runs on pattern recognition, emotional memory, environmental cues, and social conditioning, most of which you have no direct access to and no conscious control over. Your conscious mind receives the output and experiences it as a decision. The process that produced it? Already finished. Here's where this gets genuinely important for understanding influence. If decisions are being shaped by forces outside conscious awareness, then the person trying to persuade through pure logic and rational argument is, almost structurally, working against how the brain actually operates. Logic appeals to the narrator, the conscious, story-building part of the mind that likes to feel in control, that wants evidence and reasons and justifications. But the decision was often made by something else. Something faster, older, more automatic. Something running on emotional signals, pattern recognition, and subconscious environmental data. Reaching that system, the system that actually decides, requires a completely different approach. This is not theory. This is the gap between people who consistently get what they want and people who consistently don't. The ones who succeed aren't necessarily smarter. They aren't necessarily more logical or better prepared or more articulate. They've simply, consciously or instinctively, learned to communicate with the part of the brain that makes the actual call. Let's talk about priming, because this is where the illusion of free will becomes impossible to dismiss. In one of the most replicated findings in social psychology, researchers showed that exposing people to certain words, images, or concepts, even briefly, even below the threshold of conscious attention, measurably altered their subsequent behavior. People exposed to words associated with old age walked more slowly afterward, without knowing why, without any awareness of the connection. People primed with concepts of achievement performed better on cognitive tests. People shown images associated with money became less socially cooperative, more self-reliant, more likely to want to work alone. None of these people chose to be influenced. None of them were aware it was happening. None of them, if asked, would have said the images or words changed anything. But they did, consistently, measurably, across cultures, across demographics, across contexts. The environment got into them, and it changed their choices. Now consider what this means for the world you actually live in. Not a laboratory, the real world, where you are constantly surrounded by signals, messages, designs, sounds, colors, and social cues that have been deliberately constructed to move you in specific directions. The menu is designed. The store layout is designed. The pricing structure is designed. The social feed algorithm is designed. The lighting in that restaurant is designed. The music tempo is designed. All of it, relentlessly, systematically, shaping the context in which your free choices are made. You pick, but someone else designed the options. And the most important part? Knowing this doesn't fully protect you from it. The research is clear. Even people who understand priming, who study it, who teach it, they are still primed. The system runs beneath the level where awareness can fully intercept it. There are two types of people hearing this right now. Those who find this disturbing, who feel something tighten in their chest at the idea that their choices are less theirs than they believed. And those who are already thinking about the other side of it, who are quietly asking, if this is how it works, how do I work with it? Both reactions are honest. Both reactions are valid. And interestingly, which reaction you're having right now, that's also not entirely your choice. It's being shaped by your personality, your history, your relationship with control, your past experiences with influence and trust. Even your response to learning about the illusion is part of the illusion. Let's talk about what this means for the person you're trying to persuade. When someone pushes back on your idea, your request, your pitch, they experience that resistance as a rational response, as their conclusion, as something they arrived at through their own independent evaluation. It rarely is. More often, the resistance is the output of something much faster and much more automatic. A threat signal, a pattern mismatch, a subconscious inconsistency that the analytical mind then builds a rational story around. They feel like they're objecting to your argument. They're actually responding to a signal, often one you sent before the argument even began. This is why fighting objections with more logic is often counterproductive. You're arguing with the narrator. You're trying to rewrite a story that wasn't the real source of the decision. The decision came from somewhere else. That's where you need to go. Here's the deeper principle that sits underneath all of this, the one that makes sense of everything we've covered so far. The brain is not a decision-making machine. It's a prediction machine. Its primary function, the thing it evolved to do above almost anything else, is to predict what's coming next and prepare for it. To take in environmental data, match it against stored patterns, and generate a response before the situation fully arrives. This is why first impressions are so disproportionately powerful. The brain isn't waiting to collect all available evidence before forming a judgment. It's generating a prediction from the first available signal and then, critically, filtering subsequent information through that prediction. A person who reads you as safe in the first 10 seconds will interpret your subsequent behavior through that lens. A person who reads you as a threat will do the same. And changing that initial read, once it's formed, requires enormous counter-evidence delivered over significant time. Most people never get that time, which means the first signal matters more than everything that comes after it. And the first signal is almost never the first word. The practical weight of all this is something you need to sit with. If you've ever felt like you were doing everything right, making the right points, hitting the right notes, presenting the right information, and still not getting through, this is likely why. You were speaking to the narrator. The actual decision maker had already moved on. Understanding this isn't about feeling helpless. It's about redirecting energy to where it actually has impact. The subconscious systems that run human behavior are not brick walls. They're responsive. They're malleable. They respond to environment, to emotional tone, to timing, to pattern and rhythm and trust. They just don't respond to arguments. Learn to speak their language, and the conversation changes entirely. Not because you're overriding someone's free will, but because you've finally understood where will actually comes from, and you're meeting it there, instead of somewhere it never was. That's the second layer of the foundation. First, we established that influence begins before the conversation. Now we know why. Because the decisions that conversations are meant to produce are generated by systems that operate before, beneath, and largely independent of conscious deliberation. This means everything. It means where you show up matters. How you show up matters. What you've already communicated before speaking matters. And it means that the most important work you'll ever do in any persuasive context is the work that happens in the silence before anyone opens their mouth. The next section goes into exactly how to do that work, deliberately, precisely, and invisibly. Section 3. Pre-Suasion, owning the moment before the moment. There is a window. Most people never see it. They walk right past it every single day in every significant conversation they have. And because they miss it, they spend their energy in the wrong place, crafting better arguments, sharpening their delivery, preparing for objections that wouldn't exist if they'd used the window correctly. The window is the 60 seconds, sometimes less, before the real conversation begins. And in that window, the entire outcome is often decided. Here's what's happening neurologically in those opening moments. When a person enters a new interaction, their brain is doing something specific. It's running a rapid environmental scan, collecting data on safety, intent, familiarity, and status. It's asking, beneath any conscious awareness, who is this? What do they want? Is this a threat or an opportunity? How should I orient myself? This scan happens fast, faster than language, faster than thought. And the answers it generates become the lens through which everything that follows is interpreted. This is why the concept of persuasion is so powerful and so underused. Persuasion isn't about what you say. It's about what you install in someone's mind before you say anything. It's about shaping that initial scan so it orients toward openness rather than defense. The person who walks in unprepared lets the brain run its scan on random data, whatever happens to be present. The person who understands persuasion engineers what that scan finds. Robert Cialdini, whose research on influence changed how the world thinks about persuasion, used a specific term for this: channeled attention. The idea is simple and devastating in its implications. Whatever a person is thinking about immediately before a decision shapes how they make that decision. Not what they're thinking about in general, not their overall mood or worldview. The specific content of their attention in the moments just before the ask. Direct someone's attention towards security before asking about a new opportunity. They'll evaluate it through a lens of safety and stability. Direct it toward adventure and possibility. The same opportunity looks entirely different. Same information, same person, completely different response. This is not manipulation in any dark sense. This is simply understanding that context is not neutral and choosing to design it rather than leave it to chance. Let's make this practical. 3 channels through which persuasion actually operates. The first channel is environment. Physical space communicates before anyone speaks. The research on this is extensive and consistent. Temperature, lighting, seating arrangement, background sound, all of it primes the people inside it toward specific mental and emotional states. A negotiation held across a wide, formal table creates distance, psychologically and literally. The same conversation held at a round table or side by side produces measurably more collaborative outcomes. The furniture didn't change the facts. It changed the frame. If you have any control over where a conversation happens, use it deliberately. Ask yourself what mental state you want the other person in, and then design the space to create it. The second channel is timing. There are moments in a day, in a conversation, in a relationship, when a person is genuinely open, mentally clear, emotionally available, not yet depleted by decision-making. These windows are real and they're finite. Research on judicial decisions showed that judges granted parole far more often at the beginning of a session than at the end. After mental fatigue had set in, the default response became no. The facts of the cases hadn't changed. The cognitive state of the decision-maker had. You already know this instinctively. You know there are people in your life you should never approach with something important when they've just finished something difficult. You know certain times of day when you yourself are more open to new ideas. Use that knowledge. Timing your approach isn't manipulation. It's respect for how human beings actually function. The third channel is the opener. The first thing you say or do before the real conversation begins sets the entire mental frame for what follows. This is where most people casually throw away enormous leverage. Small talk isn't small. The question you ask before the question you actually care about isn't filler. It's architecture. It primes the other person's mind to be thinking about specific things, feeling specific feelings, occupying a specific mental space, right before your real ask arrives. If you want someone to be thinking about possibility, ask them something that activates possibility. If you want them thinking about trust, begin with something that surfaces it. You're not tricking them. You're simply being intentional about where their mind is when yours arrives. There's a subtler layer to this that's worth pausing on. Persuasion works not just because of what it puts into someone's mind, but because of what it removes. The biggest obstacle to any yes isn't disagreement. It's vigilance. People maintain a low-level skepticism in most interactions, a background awareness that someone might want something from them, that they should evaluate carefully, that they should protect themselves. Effective persuasion quietly lowers that vigilance before it has a chance to activate. Not through deception, through genuine warmth, through appropriate timing, through environments that signal safety, through openers that feel collaborative rather than transactional. When vigilance drops, openness rises. And openness is where decisions that favor you actually live. You felt this done to you. There's a specific person, maybe more than one, whose approach always seemed to make you more agreeable. Something about how they showed up, the timing of their ask, the energy they brought into the room. You said yes more easily to them than to others making similar requests. It felt like chemistry, like compatibility, like they just understood you. Some of it may have been all of those things, but some of it was persuasion, conscious or not. The difference between understanding this and not understanding it is the difference between leaving your results to personality and chemistry, things you can't control, and learning to deliberately create the conditions where yes becomes the natural response. You don't need better words. You need better preparation. The window exists in every interaction. Most people miss it. The ones who don't, who learn to see it, use it, and design what happens inside it, operate at a completely different level of influence. Not because they're more persuasive in the moment, because by the time the moment arrives, the work is already done. Section 4. The Micro-Yes Ladder. how agreement becomes automatic. No one wakes up and decides to say yes to something big. They say yes to something small, then something slightly less small, then something that feels like a natural next step. And by the time the real ask arrives, the one that actually matters, they're already moving in a direction, already committed, already, in some quiet internal way, on your side. This is not accidental. And in the hands of someone who understands it, it is not random. It is a system, and it works with a reliability that should make you stop and think about every significant yes you've ever given. The psychological foundation here is what researchers call commitment and consistency bias. Once a person takes a position, any position, even a small one, the brain develops a powerful drive to remain consistent with it. Not because consistency is always rational, but because inconsistency is psychologically expensive. Changing your position costs something. It requires admitting, at least internally, that your previous position was wrong. It creates cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable friction between who you thought you were and what you're now doing. The brain avoids this cost automatically. It smooths over contradictions. It builds narratives that make current behavior feel continuous with past behavior, which means that every small yes a person gives becomes a quiet anchor, pulling subsequent decisions in the same direction. The research that demonstrated this most cleanly became one of the most cited studies in social psychology. Researchers approached homeowners and asked them to place a large, unattractive sign in their front yard that read "Drive carefully." Unsurprisingly, most people refused. The sign was ugly. It would dominate their yard. A separate group was approached differently. First, they were asked to display a small, unobtrusive sticker in their window, also about safe driving. Nearly everyone agreed. Small ask. Easy yes. 2 weeks later, the same people were asked about the large yard sign. This group agreed at a rate roughly 4 times higher than those who hadn't been asked about the sticker first. The only difference was the small yes that came before the large ask. That small yes had quietly repositioned them. They now saw themselves, in some modest but real way, as people who cared about safe driving, people who took action on their values. And when the larger ask arrived, saying no would have meant contradicting that self-image. The sticker didn't just get them to display a sticker. It changed who they understood themselves to be. This is the real mechanics of the micro-yes ladder, and why it's more powerful than most people realize. Each small agreement doesn't just lower resistance to the next ask. It subtly reshapes identity. It moves someone from a person being asked to a person who has already chosen. And people will do remarkable things to stay consistent with who they've already chosen to be. You've experienced this. A conversation where you agreed with someone's first few points. Reasonable, easy, obviously true. And then found yourself nodding along to something you might have pushed back on if it had arrived first. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't carelessness. It was your brain doing exactly what it's designed to do, maintaining consistency with the position you'd already taken. Let's talk about how to build this deliberately. The micro-yes ladder works in 3 stages. Stage 1, the values yes. This is the softest, most foundational agreement. You're not asking for anything behavioral yet. You're finding the principle, the belief, the priority that the other person already holds, and naming it. Would you agree that the most important thing here is finding something that actually works long-term? Almost no one says no to that. It's their value. You've just surfaced it. And in doing so, you've created a quiet contract, one they've entered into willingly, without any sense of being led. Stage 2, the situational yes. Now you connect their stated value to the current situation. You're asking them to acknowledge a specific reality, one that flows naturally from what they've already agreed to. And right now, the current approach isn't quite doing that, would you say? This is a small, specific, low-stakes agreement, but it does something significant. It moves them from abstract values into concrete acknowledgement. They're no longer just agreeing with a principle. They're agreeing about their actual situation. Stage 3, the directional yes. This is where you introduce movement. Not the full ask, not yet, just the direction. So it sounds like you're open to looking at something different? By this point, the person has agreed with a value, acknowledged a gap, and confirmed openness to change. The actual proposal that follows doesn't arrive into resistance. It arrives into a space the person has already prepared, consciously, of their own apparent free will. There's something important to understand about why this works, even on people who know it's happening. Awareness of a cognitive bias does not reliably neutralize it. People who study consistency bias still feel the pull of their prior commitments. People who understand the foot-in-the-door technique still find it harder to say no after they've said yes. The bias runs at a level that conscious awareness doesn't fully reach. This should make you humble about your own decisions and precise about how you design the decisions of others. The most dangerous word in persuasion isn't yes. It's the first yes, because that first yes, small, casual, barely noticed, is the one that sets the trajectory of everything that follows. It's the one that begins repositioning identity. It's the one that makes the next yes easier, and the one after that easier still. If you're honest with yourself, someone has done this to you recently. You said yes to something you didn't fully intend, not because you were deceived, but because by the time the real ask arrived, you'd already built a case for it yourself, out of all the small agreements that came before. The ladder was already built. You climbed it voluntarily. That's not a failure of judgment. That's the system working exactly as designed. Now you know the system. The question is what you build with it. Section 5. Framing. The invisible architecture of every decision. Two doctors walked into two separate rooms. Each had a patient facing the same medical procedure. Each delivered the same clinical information, the same statistics, the same facts about the operation and its outcomes. One patient agreed to the procedure without hesitation. The other refused. The doctors weren't different. The medicine wasn't different. The patients were demographically identical. The only difference was this. One doctor said the procedure had a 90% survival rate. The other said it carried a 10% mortality rate. Same number, opposite frame, completely different decision. This is not a quirk. This is not an anomaly. This is one of the most replicated findings in all of behavioral science, and it exposes something fundamental about how human beings actually process information. We do not evaluate facts. We evaluate facts as they are presented to us. And the presentation, the frame, shapes the conclusion as powerfully as the content itself. The brain, as we've established, is a prediction machine running on pattern recognition and emotional signal. When information arrives, it isn't processed in a neutral vacuum. It's immediately filtered through the frame it comes packaged in. The frame answers questions the brain is always quietly asking. Is this a gain or a loss? Is this safe or risky? Is this familiar or strange? Is this person like me or different from me? These aren't conscious questions. They're automatic. And the frame, the context, the language, the sequence, the contrast, is what supplies the answers before conscious evaluation even begins. By the time your analytical mind arrives to weigh the evidence, the frame has already done most of the work. Loss framing is the most powerful single mechanism in this entire space, and it operates with a consistency that makes it almost uncomfortable to examine. Decades of research by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky established what's now called loss aversion, the finding that losses feel roughly twice as powerful as equivalent gains. Losing $100 produces approximately twice the emotional impact of gaining $100. This asymmetry is baked into the architecture of human psychology. It evolved for survival. The cost of missing a threat was historically higher than the cost of missing an opportunity, and it has never been updated for a modern world where most decisions don't involve physical danger. What this means practically is stark. A message framed around what someone stands to lose will almost always outperform the same message framed around what they stand to gain. Not slightly, significantly. You're currently losing 3 hours a week to this problem. Hits differently than this solution could save you 3 hours a week. Same 3 hours. One frame creates urgency. The other creates mild interest. Knowing this and choosing not to use it is leaving your most reliable tool on the table. Beyond loss and gain, framing operates through contrast. The contrast principle is simple. The brain doesn't evaluate things in isolation. It evaluates things relative to what came immediately before them. A price that seems expensive in isolation seems reasonable after a higher price. A request that seems large seems modest after a larger request. A candidate who seems average seems impressive standing next to a weaker one. None of this changes the objective reality. All of it changes the subjective experience of that reality. Skilled negotiators have used this instinctively for centuries. You open with a position you don't expect to get, not to deceive, but to calibrate the contrast. Your actual position, arriving after the anchor, lands in a completely different psychological context than it would have without it. The ask didn't change. The frame around it did. And the frame is what gets evaluated. There's a linguistic layer to framing that deserves specific attention. Words are not neutral containers for meaning. They arrive preloaded with emotional associations, cultural weight, and cognitive history. Choosing between two words that mean roughly the same thing is choosing between two completely different frames. Pre-owned versus used. Investment versus cost. Slim versus thin. Passing away versus dying. Challenge versus problem. Each pairing carries essentially the same denotative content. The connotative difference, the emotional and associative difference, is enormous. This isn't spin. It isn't dishonesty. It's precision. It's understanding that language is not just communication. It's architecture. And every word choice is a structural decision that shapes what gets built in someone else's mind. The person who chooses words carelessly is building randomly. The person who chooses words deliberately is building exactly what they intend. Reframing objections in real time is where this becomes a live skill rather than a theoretical one. When someone raises an objection, the instinct is to counter it, to argue against the frame they've introduced. This almost never works. Arguing against a frame reinforces it. The more you repeat the opposing position, even to refute it, the more present it becomes in the other person's mind. The move isn't to counter the frame. It's to replace it. That's actually exactly why this makes sense, because I'd look at it slightly differently. What that really means is, that concern makes complete sense from one angle. Here's the fuller picture. You're not dismissing their position. You're acknowledging it, and then offering a different window to look through. A window you've chosen. One that lets the same facts land in a context that serves the outcome you're both working toward. Done well, the other person doesn't experience this as being redirected. They experience it as gaining clarity. Here's the thing about framing that makes it both powerful and sobering. You are always framing. There is no neutral presentation. Every word choice, every sequence, every piece of context you include or leave out, all of it is constructing a frame whether you intend it to or not. The question was never whether to frame. The question is whether you're doing it consciously or accidentally. Most people are framing accidentally, choosing words by habit, sequencing information by instinct, presenting context based on what comes to mind first, and then wondering why the same facts land differently in different conversations. The facts aren't the variable. The frame is. That moment when a price seemed entirely reasonable, not because it was, objectively, but because of what was shown to you first. That conversation where an idea you'd have resisted landed as obviously correct because of how it was sequenced. That request that felt modest when it absolutely wasn't. You felt the frame working. You just didn't have a name for it. Now you do. And having a name for it means you can see it in the world around you, in the conversations aimed at you, and in every interaction where you need someone to see what you're offering in the clearest, most honest, most favorable light possible. The window exists. You get to choose what people see through it. Section 6. Emotional leverage. Logic doesn't close. Feeling does. People will give you 10 logical reasons for a decision that was made in 3 emotional seconds. This is not cynicism. This is neuroscience. And until you fully accept it, not just intellectually, but operationally, in how you actually approach conversations, you will keep making the same expensive mistake that most people make. You will keep explaining when you should be evoking. Antonio Damasio is a neuroscientist who studied patients with damage to the area of the brain responsible for emotional processing. These patients retained full cognitive function. Their intelligence, memory, and reasoning were completely intact. What they lost was the ability to feel. And what Damasio discovered was extraordinary. Without emotion, these patients became almost completely incapable of making decisions. Not bad decisions, any decisions. They could analyze options endlessly, generate pros and cons lists of remarkable sophistication, articulate the logical case for every available choice with perfect clarity, and then they would sit there, unable to choose. Emotion, it turned out, wasn't the enemy of good decision-making. It was the engine of decision-making itself. Without it, the machinery stopped. What this means for persuasion is something most people spend their entire lives not understanding. Logic doesn't close. Feeling does. Logic provides justification, the story a person tells themselves and others about why they made the choice they already emotionally committed to. But the commitment itself? That came from somewhere faster, warmer, and far less rational. Which means that every time you've responded to resistance with more information, more evidence, more carefully constructed argument, you were handing someone better material for a story they hadn't yet emotionally decided to tell. You were building the wrong thing first. There are 4 emotional drivers that close more decisions than any logical framework ever built. Identity is the most powerful. People will sacrifice comfort, money, and logic itself to remain consistent with who they believe themselves to be. If your ask aligns with someone's self-image, if saying yes makes them more of who they already want to be, resistance doesn't just lower. It often disappears. The move here isn't flattery. It's genuine recognition. Find what someone values about themselves and make your request a natural expression of that value. Fear of loss we've touched on, but emotionally it goes deeper than the mechanics of loss aversion. It's about what the loss means to their security, their status, their sense of control. Connecting your ask to relief from a specific, felt fear is among the fastest routes to genuine emotional engagement. Belonging is older than language. The need to be part of a group, to be accepted, to move with the people who matter to us. It overrides rational calculation constantly and completely. When saying yes means being part of something, or saying no means being outside it, the emotional calculus shifts dramatically. Progress, the feeling of moving forward, of growth, of becoming, is deeply motivating in a way that pure gain isn't. People want to feel like they're on a trajectory. Frame your ask as the next natural step in a direction they're already moving, and you're working with momentum rather than against inertia. Here's the practical edge of all this. Most people, when they want something, make a case. They present information. They build an argument. They explain. And in doing so, they trigger the analytical mind, the part that evaluates, compares, finds objections, and generates reasons to wait. The more you explain, the more you invite scrutiny. The less you explain, and the more you evoke, the more you engage the emotional system that actually moves people. This doesn't mean withholding information. It means sequencing correctly. Lead with feeling. Establish emotional resonance first. Let the person feel the why before you offer them the what and the how. By the time the logic arrives, it isn't being evaluated for whether to decide. It's being used to justify a decision already made. The danger of over-explaining is real and underappreciated. There's a moment in almost every persuasive conversation, a moment of emotional readiness, where the other person is genuinely open, genuinely moved, genuinely leaning toward yes. Most people talk straight through it. They feel the opening and, instead of letting it breathe, they fill it with more information, more features, more evidence, more reasoning, and the moment closes. Explain less. Evoke more. Leave space for someone to feel their way to yes. Because a yes that someone feels is one they'll keep. A yes extracted through argument is one they'll second guess the moment you leave the room. Go back to the last time you really wanted something from someone. Did you make a case? Or did you create a feeling? If you're honest, you probably made a case. Most people do. It's what we're taught. It feels responsible and fair and respectful of the other person's intelligence. But intelligence isn't what decides. Feeling does. And the sooner that moves from something you understand to something you use, the faster everything changes. Section 7. Subconscious triggers, the signals beneath the signal. While you were talking, Something else was being communicated, and that something else is what they actually responded to. This is the layer most people never reach, not because it's inaccessible, but because it's invisible. It operates beneath the conversation, beneath the words, beneath even tone and body language as most people understand it. It runs on a frequency the conscious mind doesn't easily tune into. But the subconscious mind, it receives it perfectly, every time. The human brain evolved in environments where reading other people accurately was a survival skill. Long before language became sophisticated, our ancestors were decoding each other, detecting threat, trust, dominance, and safety through microsignals that required no words. That capacity didn't disappear when language arrived. It went underground. Today, it runs as a background process, constantly scanning, constantly evaluating, constantly generating assessments of the people around us that arrive in consciousness not as data, but as feeling. You walk into a room and someone feels off to you. You can't explain why. You meet a person for the first time and something about them immediately puts you at ease. A colleague says all the right things in a meeting and you still don't trust them. That's the subconscious signal detection system doing exactly what it evolved to do. And here's what matters. You are broadcasting into that system constantly, whether you intend to or not, whether you're aware of it or not. The question is what you're broadcasting. The most fundamental subconscious signal is nervous system state, not posture, not eye contact, not the specific micro-expressions that pop psychology loves to catalog. Those are all downstream symptoms of something more primary. Your nervous system state, whether you are genuinely calm or genuinely activated, communicates directly to the nervous systems of the people around you. This is not metaphor. It's co-regulation, a documented neurobiological phenomenon rooted in what researchers call the social engagement system. When you are calm, not performing calm, actually calm, the people near you feel it. Their own nervous systems respond to yours. Their guard lowers not because you said something reassuring, but because your biology told their biology that this is safe. Conversely, when you are anxious, regardless of how controlled your words are, that signal leaks. Through breath rate, through microtensions in the face and voice, through the almost imperceptible hesitations that betray a system under pressure. You can say all the right things and still lose, because your nervous system is broadcasting something else entirely. Mirroring is the most widely known subconscious influence tool. It's also the most widely misunderstood. Most people learn that matching someone's body language builds rapport. This is true. What they miss is the mechanism, and the mechanism is everything. Mirroring works because the brain contains mirror neurons, cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. Genuine mirroring creates a sense of similarity, of being understood, of shared experience. It bypasses the analytical mind and speaks directly to the subconscious sense of this person is like me. The critical word is genuine. Mechanical mirroring, the deliberate, conscious copying of someone's posture and gestures, is often detected subconsciously even when it's invisible consciously. Something feels slightly off. The rapport doesn't quite land. The person can't explain their unease, but it's there. Genuine mirroring emerges from real attention and real interest. When you are truly engaged with someone, truly listening, truly present, natural mirroring happens without effort, and it lands completely differently. The tool isn't the technique. The tool is the attention. Subconscious scarcity operates differently from stated scarcity. Telling someone something is rare or limited is a conscious appeal, one they can evaluate, question, or dismiss. But feeling scarcity, sensing it through your behavior, your energy, the way you hold the conversation, bypasses that evaluation entirely. The person who is fully present but clearly has other places to be communicates value without stating it. The idea that is offered once and not repeated carries more weight than the one pursued and re-explained. The slight, genuine ease of someone who is prepared to walk away registers at a subconscious level that explicit statements of non-attachment never reach. Performed scarcity is detectable. Genuine non-attachment is magnetic. There is someone in your life whose presence alone makes you more agreeable. You've probably never examined why. You just know that around them, decisions feel easier, resistance feels unnecessary, yes feels more natural. It isn't charm in any superficial sense. It isn't looks or status or verbal skill, though those may be present. It's signal coherence. Everything they broadcast, nervous system state, attention quality, the genuine ease of someone who doesn't need anything from you even when they want something. All of it points in the same direction. The subconscious skin finds no contradictions, no threat signals, no mismatches between what's being said and what's being felt. And when the subconscious finds coherence, it relaxes. Relaxed people say yes. The practical implication is both simple and demanding. You cannot fake your way into subconscious trust. You can only build it through genuine regulation of your own internal state, through real attention, through the slow accumulation of signal coherence across interactions. This is why the most influential people you've encountered weren't necessarily the most technically skilled. They were the most coherent, the most genuinely present, the most actually calm. Your nervous system is talking. Make sure it's saying what you intend. Section 8. Social proof dynamics. How the crowd becomes your closer. The most persuasive thing you can ever say isn't your own opinion. It's everyone else's. This isn't a weakness in human psychology. It's a deeply rational adaptation dressed in irrational clothing. In a world of infinite options and limited time, using other people's decisions as a signal for your own is genuinely efficient. The problem isn't the mechanism. The problem is how completely invisible it is and how thoroughly it can be engineered. The research here is unambiguous and slightly humbling. In one study, hotel guests were significantly more likely to reuse their towels when told that the majority of guests in their specific room had done so, more than when given environmental arguments, more than when given any other framing. Not most guests, not many people, the guests in this room. The closer the social proof was to their specific identity and situation, the more powerfully it moved behavior. Same ask, same hotel, same towels. The specificity of the crowd changed everything. This is the principle beneath the principle. Social proof isn't just about numbers. It's about relevant numbers, about people who feel like me. There's a reason this mechanism is so deeply embedded. For most of human history, if the people around you were running, you ran. If they were calm, you were calm. If they were eating something, it was probably safe to eat. Tracking and matching group behavior was a survival shortcut that worked reliably enough to get coded deep into our decision-making architecture. That coding doesn't switch off in modern contexts. It simply gets applied to different decisions: which product to buy, which idea to trust, which person to say yes to. Nobody wants to be first. The first person takes all the risk, does all the evaluative work, carries the full weight of an uncertain decision. But nobody wants to be last either, left outside a consensus that everyone else has already reached. Use both. The hesitant decision maker needs to know they won't be alone in saying yes. The competitive one needs to sense they might be late. The application that most people miss is real-time social proof, building it inside a conversation rather than importing it from outside. Stated social proof, our other clients have found, is useful but detectable. It arrives labeled. The listener knows they're being given evidence and can choose how much weight to give it. Embedded social proof lands differently. Most people in your position have found that the first step is the hardest. After that, it becomes obvious. Interestingly, the people who pushed back most on this idea initially tend to become its strongest advocates. Neither of these is a sales claim. Both install a social reality. Both answer the subconscious question, what are people like me doing? Without triggering the evaluation that explicit claims invite. There's a dark side to social proof worth understanding. Not to use it, but to recognize when it's being used on you. Negative social proof is one of the most common and most costly mistakes in influence. It's the well-intentioned message that accidentally communicates exactly the wrong thing. Thousands of people struggle with this problem. It's meant to normalize. What it actually does is confirm that the problem is widespread and perhaps intractable. The crowd it evokes is a crowd of people who haven't solved it. Cialdini documented this effect at the Petrified Forest National Park, were signs warning visitors that many people had stolen would actually increase theft. The social proof embedded in the warning was, lots of people do this. Before you invoke the crowd, ask which crowd you're invoking and what behavior that crowd is modeling. Here's what you need to sit with. You didn't choose that restaurant. You chose what 300 other people already chose, filtered through a rating system, confirmed by people whose taste you don't actually know. You experienced that as preference, as judgment, as your own considered decision. The crowd was your closer. It just did its work quietly enough that you felt like the one deciding. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's the system functioning exactly as designed. Understanding it means you can use it deliberately, not to push people toward things that don't serve them, but to reduce the friction around decisions that genuinely do. The crowd was always going to close for someone. Might as well be you. Section 9. Authority and trust engineering. Becoming the person people defer to. They didn't trust you because of what you knew. They trusted you because of how you carried what you knew. This distinction sounds subtle. It isn't. It's the difference between expertise that stays locked inside you and expertise that actually moves people. Between being right and being believed. Between knowing the answer and being the person someone turns to when they need one. Authority is not a credential. It's a signal, and signals can be learned. In Stanley Milgram's famous obedience studies, ordinary people administered what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to strangers, simply because a figure in a lab coat told them to continue. The lab coat wasn't doing anything. It was communicating something. It was a signal, one the brain reads as this person knows what they're doing, defer to their judgment. And that signal was enough to override individual moral resistance in a significant majority of participants. This is disturbing for obvious reasons, but it also reveals something precise about how authority actually operates. It isn't earned in the moment through demonstration. It's perceived, rapidly, automatically, based on signals that precede any actual evidence of competence. The brain decides who to defer to before it has enough information to decide rationally. Then it uses subsequent information to confirm that initial read. Perceived authority rests on 3 pillars, and the order matters. Competence is what most people focus on entirely. They demonstrate knowledge, cite credentials, reference experience. This matters, but it's the least leveraged of the 3 because it's the most expected. Everyone trying to establish authority leads with competence. It gets you to baseline. It doesn't differentiate you. Confidence is more powerful than most people are comfortable admitting. Not loudness, not aggression. Those signal insecurity more than authority. Real confidence is stillness. It's the person who doesn't rush to fill silence, who delivers an uncertain answer without apologizing for the uncertainty, who disagrees without needing the room's approval. The most authoritative people in any conversation are the ones most comfortable with silence. That comfort signals, subconsciously, immediately, that they have nothing to prove. Care is the pillar almost everyone neglects, and it's the one that converts perceived authority into genuine trust. Competence says I know things. Confidence says I'm certain enough to act. Care says I'm using this for you, not on you. Without care, authority creates compliance. With it, authority creates trust. And trust is the only version of authority that survives contact with reality. Here's the counterintuitive piece that changes how most people think about credibility. Vulnerability, deployed precisely, builds more authority than credentials. Not general vulnerability, not oversharing or performed humility. Precise vulnerability, the specific, confident acknowledgement of a genuine limitation within a domain where your competence is already established. I don't know the answer to that, but here's exactly how I'd find it. There are people who know this area better than I do. What I can tell you is what I've seen work consistently. These statements don't diminish authority. They amplify it, because they signal something credentials can't, that you're honest, that your confidence is calibrated, that when you do claim certainty, it can be trusted. The expert who admits uncertainty is more credible than the expert who never does. The brain knows that no one knows everything. The person who pretends otherwise is either lying or unaware of their own limitations, neither of which is a person worth deferring to. Trust, at its most practical, is established in under 90 seconds, or it's an uphill climb for the rest of the conversation. The signals that create it are specific. Eye contact that is steady without being aggressive, a pace of speech slightly slower than feels natural, physical stillness that communicates ease, an opener that demonstrates genuine interest in the other person rather than immediate agenda. None of these require talent. All of them require intention. Most people have never been taught how to be perceived as credible. They assume it accumulates automatically, through experience, through track record, through time. Sometimes it does, slowly. But credibility can also be built deliberately, immediately, through the precise management of signals that the subconscious reads before the conscious mind has formed an opinion. You already know this. You've met people who had it from the first sentence. You've also met people who never quite got there despite years of genuine expertise. The difference was never what they knew. It was what they signaled. Section 10. Silent persuasion. What you don't say does the heaviest work. The pause you were too afraid to let breathe, that was the moment you lost them. Not the argument you didn't make. Not the point you forgot to hit. Not the evidence you left out. The silence you filled. Most people experience silence in conversation as a problem to be solved. An absence that signals awkwardness, uncertainty, or loss of control. So they fill it, reflexively, anxiously, often with the exact words that undermine everything they'd built to that point. What they don't realize is that silence isn't an absence of persuasion. It's often the most persuasive thing in the room. Let's establish why silence works before we talk about how to use it. The brain abhors cognitive incompleteness. When a thought is left unfinished, when a question hangs without an answer, when a pause creates a gap, the mind rushes to fill it. This is called the Zeigarnik effect. Incomplete things demand more mental attention than completed ones. A silence in conversation doesn't just pause the exchange. It activates the other person's mind. It pulls them forward. It makes them participants in the construction of meaning rather than passive recipients of yours. And here's what matters. The meaning they construct feels like theirs. Their conclusion, arrived at in a silence you created, carries more weight than any conclusion you hand them directly. You didn't tell them. They realized. And realizations stick in a way that information never quite does. Strategic silence operates in 3 distinct modes. Post-ask silence is the most immediately useful. You make a request, you state a price, you offer a proposal, and then you stop. Completely. However long it takes. The instinct, especially under pressure, is to keep talking. To soften the ask, add qualifiers, rush to address objections that haven't been raised yet. This is one of the most common and costly mistakes in negotiation. Every word you add after the ask dilutes it. It signals anxiety. It tells the other person's subconscious that you're not fully confident in what you just said, and that there may be room to push back, push down, or simply wait you out. The person who speaks first after an ask is almost always at a disadvantage. Sit in it. Let it work. Reflective silence is the pause before you respond to something, particularly something challenging. Instead of answering immediately, you hold the space for 2 or 3 seconds. This does several things simultaneously. It signals that you're actually processing what was said rather than simply waiting for your turn to speak. It elevates the perceived weight of your response before you've delivered it. And it slows the pace of the entire conversation, shifting it from reactive to considered. In that shift, your authority quietly rises. Unfinished silence is the most sophisticated of the 3. You begin a thought and leave it deliberately incomplete, trailing off just before the conclusion, letting the other person's mind complete the circuit. And I think you probably already know what that means for. Most people in your position have come to the same conclusion, that you don't finish. You let them finish. And when they do, they've arrived at your destination by their own apparent route. Pacing is silence's close relative, and equally underused. The speed at which you speak communicates something independent of the content of your words. Fast speech signals urgency, anxiety, eagerness to be heard before the window closes. Slow, deliberate speech signals certainty, the unhurried pace of someone who knows they have time because they know what they're saying is worth waiting for. Slowing down by even 20% from your natural pace changes how you're perceived in a conversation. It's uncomfortable at first. It feels artificially slow from the inside. From the outside, it reads as authority. The most compelling speakers you've encountered weren't fast. They were precise. They chose words with care and let them land before reaching for the next ones. There is a specific conversation in your past where staying quiet would have changed the outcome entirely. You felt the moment. Something in the air told you the other person was on the edge of yes, processing, considering, almost there. And you spoke, maybe to reassure them, maybe to add one more point, maybe simply because the silence felt unbearable. And the moment closed. You know exactly which conversation that was. Silence, used deliberately, is not passivity. It's pressure without aggression. It's confidence without claim. It's the space inside which other people talk themselves into exactly where you need them to be. The heaviest work in any persuasive conversation is often done by the words that never get spoken. Learn to let them do it. Section 11. Resistance breakdown. Why people push back and how to move with it. The moment someone pushes back isn't a setback. It's an invitation if you know how to read it. Most people don't. Most people experience resistance as opposition, as a door closing, a wall going up, a signal that the conversation is moving in the wrong direction. So they do what feels natural. They push back against the pushback. They defend their position. They add more evidence, more argument, more pressure, and the wall gets thicker. What they never consider is that resistance, at its core, is almost never about the idea being resisted. It's about something beneath the idea, something the idea is threatening. And the moment you understand what that something is, the resistance doesn't need to be overcome. It dissolves. Psychologists call the underlying mechanism reactance. When people feel their freedom to choose is being threatened, when they sense pressure, manipulation, or loss of control, they don't just resist the specific request. They actively move away from it. The more you push, the more they pull. Not because they've evaluated your idea and found it wanting, but because the act of being pushed has triggered a protective response that has nothing to do with the idea itself. This means that escalating pressure in the face of resistance is almost always counterproductive. You're not overcoming an objection. You're feeding the mechanism that generated it. The solution isn't more force. It's less. There's a distinction that changes everything once you see it clearly. Real objections and protective objections are not the same thing, and they require completely different responses. A real objection is specific, logical, and addressable. The timeline doesn't work for us. The price is above our current budget. We've tried something similar before, and it didn't deliver. These are genuine concerns. They have content. They can be engaged with directly. A protective objection is vaguer, more emotional, and often arrives quickly, before the person has had time to fully evaluate anything. I'm not sure this is right for us. We need to think about it. It's just not something we're looking at right now. These aren't conclusions. They're shields. They're the language of someone who feels exposed, uncertain, or pressured, and is creating distance until they feel safe enough to actually engage. Arguing against a shield achieves nothing. It just confirms that the threat is real. The only move with a protective objection is to lower the pressure entirely and rebuild the safety that the approach inadvertently destroyed. The technique that works most reliably across both types of resistance is deceptively simple. Validate before you redirect. Not performative validation. Not the hollow, "that's a great point, that fools no one." Genuine acknowledgement that the concern makes sense, that you understand why they're feeling it, that their hesitation is reasonable given what they know. That concern makes complete sense, and honestly, if I were in your position, I'd probably feel the same way. This does something specific in the other person's nervous system. It removes the need to defend. When someone feels genuinely heard, the energy that was maintaining the resistance has nowhere to go. It doesn't need to hold the wall anymore. And in that moment of release, that's where the redirect lands. Not an argument, not a counterpoint, a reframe, a different window onto the same situation, offered gently into the space that just opened up. There's a physical quality to resistance that most people miss entirely. When someone pushes back, their body tightens. Their jaw, their shoulders, their posture, all of it closes slightly inward. The nervous system has moved into a mild defensive state, and no amount of logical counterargument reaches a nervous system in that state effectively. This is why skilled negotiators learn to physically mirror relaxation in moments of resistance. Slower breath, softer posture, a slight lean back rather than forward. Not as a technique, as a genuine signal. I'm not threatening you. There's nothing to defend against here. The body communicates this faster and more credibly than any words. And when the other person's nervous system reads that signal, registers the absence of threat, the physical tension begins to release. Thought follows physiology more than we like to admit. They're not saying no to your idea. They're protecting something. A past experience that ended badly. A fear of looking foolish. A loyalty to a previous decision they're not ready to abandon. A need to feel like the choice is theirs. Find out what they're protecting and protect it with them. The moment someone feels you're on the same side of the thing they're defending, resistance stops being resistance. It becomes collaboration. And collaboration is where every yes worth having actually lives. Section 12. The ethical edge. Influence with integrity or lose everything. Everything you've learned in this audiobook can be used to build or to destroy. The techniques are neutral. Pre-suasion, framing, emotional leverage, silence, the micro-yes ladder. None of these carry moral weight in themselves. They're instruments. And like every instrument ever crafted, their ethical character lives entirely in the intention behind them and the reality they produce in the lives of the people they touch. This final section isn't a disclaimer. It isn't the cautious legal footnote that walks everything back. It isn't the part where the author hedges against criticism by suddenly pretending the previous 11 sections were purely academic. It's the part that separates the people who use these tools effectively over a lifetime from the ones who burn through trust, relationships, and reputation chasing short-term wins they'll spend years trying to recover from. Pay attention here. This section matters more than any other. Let's start with the hard truth that most books on persuasion quietly avoid. Manipulative influence works. In the short term, it works with uncomfortable reliability. You can move people toward decisions that don't serve them. You can engineer yes that are technically consensual but fundamentally coerced. You can use persuasion to exploit rather than prepare, framing to deceive rather than clarify, emotional leverage to destabilize rather than connect. You can run every system in this audiobook in reverse, pointed at extraction rather than alignment. And for a period of time, sometimes a surprisingly long one, you won't feel any significant consequences. Then the reckoning arrives, and it's rarely gradual. Trust, once it collapses, doesn't simply reduce. It inverts. The person who realizes, even subconsciously, even without being able to articulate exactly what happened, that they were steered rather than served doesn't quietly withdraw. They become actively negative. They warn people in rooms you'll never enter. They become the loudest counter-evidence to every future claim you make. They carry the story of what you did with a persistence and emotional charge that positive experiences rarely generate. Because betrayal of trust is one of the most neurologically impactful experiences a human being can have. The research on this is consistent across cultures and contexts. Negative social information travels farther, faster, and with more staying power than positive information. One person who feels genuinely manipulated will cost you more than 10 satisfied people can recover. Influence without integrity isn't a sustainable strategy. It's a loan with an interest rate nobody shows you up front. And when repayment comes, it consumes everything the short-term gains ever built. There's a distinction that needs to become foundational to how you use everything you've learned here. Influence operates in two fundamentally different directions, and the techniques are identical in both. The first direction moves people toward outcomes that serve you at their genuine expense, where the yes extracts something they wouldn't freely give with full information, real options, and actual freedom, where your skill at reducing resistance is being used to bypass someone's legitimate judgment rather than support it. The second direction moves people toward outcomes that genuinely serve them, where your understanding of psychology, timing, framing, and emotional resonance helps someone arrive at a decision that's actually in their interest, faster, and with less unnecessary friction than they'd have managed without you. The psychological mechanics are identical. The direction is everything. The moral weight lives entirely in that distinction. A doctor who uses precise framing to help a frightened patient accept a necessary procedure is running the same cognitive mechanics as someone using framing to sell a product that doesn't deliver. The neuroscience is the same. The ethical reality is opposite. A negotiator who uses silence and emotional attunement to reach an agreement both parties genuinely benefit from is using the same tools as someone who uses those same techniques to extract a one-sided deal from someone who didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to. Same instruments, completely different music. You choose the music, consciously, deliberately, every single time you enter a conversation with the intention to influence. And the choice compounds. It builds, over time, into something much larger than any individual interaction. Now let's talk about what genuine ethical influence actually looks like in practice, because this isn't just a philosophical position. It has specific, operational characteristics. The first is alignment of interest. Before you apply any technique in this audiobook, ask one question. If this person had complete information and total freedom, would they still say yes? If the answer is genuinely yes, if what you're offering actually serves them, then your influence is working in the right direction. Every tool here becomes a way of helping them see something true more clearly. If the answer is no, if the yes you're engineering depends on incomplete information, manufactured urgency, or exploited bias, then you're not persuading. You're taking. The second characteristic is transparency of intent. You don't need to announce your techniques. Genuine ethical influence doesn't require a disclaimer before every conversation. But your overall intent, what you want for the other person, not just from them, should be something you could state honestly if asked. If the honest answer to what do you want from this conversation would damage trust rather than build it, that's information worth taking seriously. The third is outcome accountability. Ethical influencers stay present after the yes. They care whether the decision they facilitated produced the result they promised. They don't vanish once the agreement is signed. The willingness to be accountable for outcomes, not just the conversation that produced them, is one of the clearest signals of whether influence is being practiced with integrity or without it. Here's something this audiobook has been building toward that deserves to be stated directly. Understanding influence at this depth makes you a different kind of person in every interaction. Not just the ones where you're consciously trying to persuade someone of something. It makes you a better listener because you understand what's actually happening beneath surface-level communication. It makes you more patient with resistance because you understand what resistance is actually protecting. It makes you more precise with language, more intentional with timing, more aware of the environments you create around conversations. These aren't just persuasion skills. They're human skills. And applied with genuine care for the people you're using them with, they make you, over time, someone whose presence in any interaction raises the quality of that interaction. That's worth more than any individual yes. There's one more thing, perhaps the most important thing. You are also being influenced, constantly, systematically, by forces far more resourced and sophisticated than any individual. Algorithms engineered to exploit attention. Pricing architectures designed to exploit anchoring, political messaging designed to exploit identity, advertising built on decades of psychological research aimed at moving you before you've consciously decided to move. Understanding what you've learned here isn't just about becoming more effective at influencing others. It's about becoming genuinely harder to manipulate yourself, about seeing frames as frames, about noticing when a micro-yes ladder is being built beneath your feet, about recognizing pre-suasion when it's being run on you, and choosing, consciously, whether to step into the window that's been prepared or to step back and decide from a clearer place. This is what real psychological literacy looks like. Not just the ability to move people, but the ability to see movement for what it is, in every direction, including toward yourself. Awareness is protection, and the person who extends that protection to the people they influence, who uses these tools to genuinely illuminate rather than to obscure, to serve rather than to extract. That person builds something that no technique alone ever could. They build a reputation, a real one, the kind that arrives in rooms before they do, the kind that makes the next conversation easier before it begins. You've met people who got what they wanted through pressure, and you've met people who got what they wanted and left you feeling like you want to. You already know which one you want to be. Every tool in this audiobook is now yours. Use it to build something worth building.